My mom's creepy boyfriend sent my dad to prison, but I exposed what he did.
My mom tried to force me to call her new boyfriend daddy just 5 months after my real dad got locked up for murder. Little did she know, I was about to uncover something that would turn everything upside down and prove that he wasn't who he claimed to be. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Redditist, where we dive into the wildest, most unbelievable stories Reddit has to offer. And today's story? Absolutely insane. We've got wrongful imprisonment, a seriously disturbing family situation, and a 13-year-old who refuses to accept the official story. This one's got more twist than a pretzel factory. Grab your snacks, settle in, because you're not going to see where this goes. So picture this. I'm 13 years old when my mom gets engaged to this guy named Brandon. And I'm not talking about a sweet, let's blend our families kind of situation. No. This happened 5 months after my dad got convicted of manslaughter. 5 months. Now, here's where it gets messed up. My dad wasn't some violent criminal. The man didn't have an aggressive bone in his body. I was literally with him the night it all went down. We were at this bar, not because he was drinking, he was working, when he went to the bathroom. Minutes later, he came stumbling out, absolutely covered in blood, screaming for someone to call the police. And what did the cops do? Slapped handcuffs on him and dragged him away without a second thought. The next time I saw my dad, he was behind bars, swearing up and down that he didn't do it. And honestly, I believed him, because the whole thing never added up. But my mom? Oh, she had a completely different reaction. Instead of, questioning whether the love of her life actually committed murder, she brought Brandon home. Like, immediately. Day one, this dude's living in our house, and my mom's already started her little campaign to erase my dad from existence. She told me Brandon was my new dad now, said my real father was a monster, a killer, someone I needed to distance myself from for my own safety. Yeah, real maternal instincts there, Mom. At first, I didn't know what to think. I was 13 and confused. But then, 5 months later, my mom drops this absolute bomb on me. She and Brandon are engaged, and I need to start calling him Daddy. And that's when alarm bells started going off in my head. Because what kind of person moves on that fast? What kind of timeline was this? Around this same time, Brandon started getting comfortable. And I mean that in the worst possible way. He'd stare at me during dinner. Not like a normal, how was your day kind of look. No, this was slow, deliberate, predatory. He'd say things like, you're growing up so fast. Becoming such a pretty young woman. And my mom? She thought it was sweet. I told her, straight up, that Brandon made my skin crawl. And you know what she said? That I was being dramatic. Oh, but it gets worse. Because apparently she told Brandon what I said. And that night, while she was asleep, he came into my room. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks and leaned in close. You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch? I was terrified, but I knew I couldn't tell my mom. She'd already made it clear whose side she was on. So I kept it to myself. But I also started keeping another secret around this time, one that would eventually change everything. I started writing letters to my dad in prison. I'd hide the letters between my textbook pages and mail them from my friend's house after school. Dad would write back through the prison email system using an account I'd created in secret. It was the only thing keeping me sane. And honestly, the more I talked to my dad, the more convinced I became that something about his case was seriously wrong. But then things took a really dark turn. I came home from school one day to find out my mom had changed my last name on all my school records to Brandon's last name. Without even asking me. She told me Brandon was my new dad now. Said my real father was a monster, a killer, someone I needed to distance myself from for my own safety. Yeah, real maternal instincts there, Mom. At first, I didn't know what to think. I was 13 and confused. But then, 5 months later, my mom drops this absolute bomb on me. She and Brandon are engaged, and I need to start calling him Daddy. And that's when alarm bells started going off in my head. Because what kind of person moves on that fast? What kind of timeline was this? Around this same time, Brandon started getting comfortable. And I mean that in the worst possible way. He'd stare at me during dinner. Not like a normal, how was your day kind of look. No, this was slow, deliberate, predatory. He'd say things like, you're growing up so fast. Becoming such a pretty young woman. And my mom? She thought it was sweet. I told her, straight up told her that Brandon made my skin crawl. And you know what she said? That I was being dramatic. Oh, but it gets worse. Because apparently she told Brandon what I said. And that night, while she was asleep, he came into my room. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks and leaned in close. You know what happens to naughty girls who snitch? I was terrified, but I knew I couldn't tell my mom. She'd already made it clear whose side she was on. So I kept it to myself, but I also started keeping another secret around this time, one that would eventually change everything. I started writing letters to my dad in prison. I'd hide the letters between my textbook pages and mail them from my friend's house after school. Dad would write back through the prison email system using an account I'd created in secret. It was the only thing keeping me sane. And honestly, the more I talked to my dad, the more convinced I became that something about his case was seriously wrong. But then things took a really dark turn. I came home from school one day to find out my mom had changed my last name on all my school records to Brandon's last name, without even asking me. "You'll thank me when you're older," like she was doing me some kind of favor. That night, Brandon came into my room to celebrate us being a real family now. He sat on my bed, put his hand on my thigh, and told me I should be grateful to have a dad who cares so much. I shoved him off and locked myself in the bathroom until he left. I wrote about that to my dad. And when I got his reply, it was on real paper this time, not email. Parts of it were damp, like he'd been crying while he was writing. That almost broke me. Dad's birthday was coming up, and I begged my mom to let me visit him. I told her I know she didn't like him, but it was just one day, just a few minutes, please. She said no. Actually, worse than no. She said we couldn't go because Brandon had conveniently bought tickets to some car show that exact weekend. And get this, he booked adjoining hotel rooms. Yeah, adjoining. Because that's not creepy at all. When I said I'd rather visit my dad, my mom exploded, screaming about how he was a killer, how I wasn't visiting a murderer. And when I said he's innocent and he's still my dad, Brandon backhanded me across the face. And my mom just watched, said nothing. I was forced to go on that trip, and while I was sleeping in that hotel room, Brandon snuck in. He was drunk, and this time it wasn't just a hand on my thigh. I've never felt so disgusting, so humiliated. I came home completely broken. And then, as if the universe was just piling it on, my mom found the hidden letters I'd been writing to my dad. She burned them in the backyard. And as punishment for talking to him, she took my bedroom door off its hinges. For monitoring, she said. Brandon, of course, saw this as an opportunity. He'd stand in the doorway at night, just watching me sleep. That was my breaking point. I snuck into the school library after hours and sent my dad this massive email. I just rambled about everything. Brandon, Mom, how scared I was. I didn't even know what I wanted him to do. I was just numb. 2 weeks later, I got a reply. It was long, full of reassurances that everything would be okay. But there was one line that stuck out. "Did you check where I said?" I was confused. Check where? So I went through every single email he ever sent me. And that's when I found it. In one of his recent emails, he told me to go up to the attic and look behind the radiator. I'd been too heartbroken after the birthday thing to read it carefully, but now I had a mission. I waited until Mom and Brandon went on date night. My hands were shaking as I climbed into the attic with a flashlight. And there, behind the radiator, wrapped in plastic, was a journal. I opened it to the page my dad had marked. It was dated weeks before his arrest, written in his handwriting. It's been a few weeks since I caught Lauren and Brandon together at the bar. I don't know how to confront her. Wait, my mom and Brandon knew each other before my dad's arrest? Suddenly, everything felt wrong. The timeline didn't add up. The speed of their relationship, the way Brandon seemed to know exactly how to manipulate my mom. And then I heard it. A car pulling into the driveway. They were home early. My blood ran cold. I heard car doors slamming, my mom's heels clicking on the walkway. I clutched the journal to my chest, knowing I had maybe seconds to figure out what to do. Then I heard Brandon's heady footsteps on the stairs. Each creak felt like a countdown. I shoved the journal under my shirt and scrambled toward the attic ladder, but I was too slow. Brandon's head popped through the opening just as I reached it. His eyes locked onto mine. For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he climbed all the way up, his shoulders barely fitting through the hole. I backed up against the wall, the journal pressing cold against my stomach under my shirt. He looked around slowly, taking in the disturbed dust, the moved boxes near the radiator. Then he asked, voice dangerously calm, "What are you doing up here?" I told him I was looking for my old stuffed animals, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't believe me. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, and for just a second I saw something flash in his eyes. Not anger, something else. Fear? He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and said, "You're a terrible liar, just like your father." Then he yanked me toward the ladder. I had to use my other hand to keep the journal from falling out of my shirt.
Mom was waiting at the bottom, arms crossed, looking annoyed. Brandon told her I was sneaking around like some kind of thief and suggested they search my room. I panicked and blurted out that I just wanted my old teddy bear because I couldn't sleep without my door. Mom rolled her eyes but seemed to buy it. That night, I waited until they were both snoring. Then I hid the journal inside my pillowcase and tried to sleep, feeling the corners dig into my cheek. One thing was becoming crystal clear. Brandon was terrified of what I might find in that attic, which meant there was more to discover. The next morning, I moved the journal to a better hiding spot, inside the toilet tank wrapped in a plastic bag. At school on Monday, I snuck into the computer lab during lunch. My hands were still shaking as I took photos of every single page with my phone. The entries went back years, and the more I read, the more my stomach turned. My dad had written about his suspicions. Brandon's car parked down the street at weird hours, receipts from motels he found in Mom's purse, Brandon showing up at the bar during Dad's shifts just to watch him. One entry dated 2 weeks before the murder made my blood cold. Brandon was at the bar again tonight. He asked me what time I usually take my break, said he wanted to chat sometime. Something about the way he smiled made me uneasy. I can't shake this feeling that he's planning something. My dad had suspected something was wrong, and then 2 weeks later, someone ended up dead in that bathroom. I uploaded everything to a secret cloud account, then deleted the photos from my phone. I know Brandon might check it. And I was right. When I got home, he was sitting on my bed. He'd gone through everything. Drawers dumped, mattress flipped, jewelry box emptied. "Where is it?" he asked, voice quiet and dangerous. I played dumb. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me, saying he wasn't stupid, that he knew I found something. That's when Mom came home. And Brandon? He switched instantly, smiled that fake smile and told her he was just helping me reorganize. She believed him. But I'd seen the panic in his eyes. Whatever was in that journal, Brandon was desperate to keep hidden. That night at dinner, Brandon announced they were moving the wedding up. Instead of next year, it'd be next month. Mom squealed with excitement. I felt sick. Because now I was starting to put pieces together. The affair, Dad's convenient arrest, Brandon swooping in immediately, the rushed wedding. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned. Over the next few weeks, Brandon's surveillance ramped up. Camera in the hallway, driving me to and from school, taking my phone at night. He was closing off my exits, making sure I couldn't find more evidence or talk to anyone. But he'd forgotten about someone. Uncle Henry, my dad's best friend. Mom had banned him from our lives after Dad's arrest. But I found his number in an old address book. I called him from the payphone outside school. When I told him about the journal, about Brandon and my mom's affair, about my dad's suspicions, there was a long silence. Then Uncle Henry said, "I always knew something was wrong about that night. Your dad's arrest happened too fast, too clean." He told me to meet him at the library the next day. Uncle Henry became my lifeline. Over the next 2 weeks, we met 3 times, and he started digging into what really happened that night. He tracked down Edward, the security guard who was working. He remembered something the police never asked about. Brandon was at the bar that night. But Brandon had told police he was home all evening watching TV. So why did he lie? Caroline, the bartender, had even more to say. She remembered Brandon coming around for weeks before the incident, always asking about my dad's schedule, pretending to be friendly. And then the big one. Brian, the bar manager, mentioned they had upgraded their security system a month before the murder. The police only took the main camera footage, but there was a backup system that recorded the hallway to the bathrooms. And Brian still had those files on an old hard drive. Uncle Henry's face went pale. "We need to see that footage." We met at Brian's house to watch it. My stomach was in knots as Brian connected the drive to his laptop. The timestamp loaded. 9:47 p.m. The hallway was empty. Then Brandon walked into frame, looking calm, checking over his shoulder. He entered the bathroom. 9:52. My dad appeared, probably just needing to use the bathroom after his shift, completely unaware that Brandon was in there. 9:51. Brandon came out, checking his watch, smoothing down his shirt, looking satisfied. 9:53. My dad burst out, covered in blood, face twisted in shock and horror, shouting for help. Brandon had 4 minutes alone in that bathroom before my dad entered. 4 minutes with the victim, 4 minutes to commit murder and set a trap. My dad never killed anyone. He walked into a crime scene that was meant for him to find, meant for him to touch, meant to frame him. And Brandon? Brandon was the one who had been in there when it happened. Uncle Henry and I just stared at each other. My mom's boyfriend, the man she was about to marry, the man living in our house, was a murderer. And he'd framed my dad to steal his entire life. Uncle Henry copied the footage onto multiple USB drives, his hands shaking. He said we needed to be careful about how we handled this. We couldn't just go to the police. Brandon might not have connections. I tried to act normal at home, but Brandon must have sensed something was off. One night he came into my room and sat on my bed. The camera couldn't see him from that angle. He said he knew I had been meeting with Uncle Henry. Someone had seen us. And then he leaned in close. He said, if you don't stop whatever you're doing, your mom might get hurt. Accidents happen all the time. People fall downstairs. Cars have brake problems. Gas leaks happen. He was threatening to kill my mom if I exposed him. Just like he'd killed that man in the bathroom. Just like he destroyed my dad's life. I realized then what kind of monster my mom had brought into our home. I told Uncle Henry about the threat. He said we needed to move faster, build an airtight case. That night at 3 a.m., I retrieved the journal from the toilet tank. I put it in my backpack for school. But when I came out of the bathroom, Brandon was standing in the hallway. I said I felt sick. He stared at me for a long moment, then let me pass. The next morning, my backpack was gone. I found it in the kitchen, empty, contents spread across the table. Brandon was sitting there with the journal, flipping through pages. My mom was reading it, looking pale and confused. And Brandon, he had the perfect explanation ready. He told my mom I was writing fantasy stories about him, that I was disturbed, that I needed help. He pointed to entries and said, look how she's trying to copy your ex-husband's handwriting. This is clearly her sick fantasy about breaking us up. And my mom believed him. She said I needed therapy, maybe even a boarding school for troubled teens. Brandon's cousin ran one, he said, very strict, very isolated, in another state. I realized this was his endgame. Get rid of me before I could expose the truth. Saturday morning, I managed to slip out while Brandon was in the shower. I ran to my friend Ashley's house. But when I got back home, Brandon was waiting. He dragged me inside and threw me against the wall. And then, thinking we were completely alone, thinking he'd already won, he started talking. He said he'd worked hard to let a bratty kid destroy his plants, that my dad deserved what happened to him, that my mom was pathetically easy to manipulate. He told me about the man in the bathroom, how the guy had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, how he'd had to silence him when he saw too much. He told me how when my dad walked in to help, it was perfect. Fresh blood, dad's prints on everything while trying to save the victim. What Brandon didn't know? I was recording everything on Ashley's phone hidden in my pocket. Every single word. And that's when my mom walked in. She had come back early because she forgot her wallet. She heard everything. The confession, the manipulation, the murder. Her face went white. She dropped the groceries. Oranges rolled across the floor. Brandon spun around, realizing his fatal mistake. He tried to backtrack, saying I'd made him angry, that he didn't mean it. But Mom had heard enough. She told him to get out. He laughed and said she wouldn't dare, too much scandal. But Mom grabbed a kitchen knife from the block and told him to leave or she'd call the police. For the first time in months, I saw the mom I used to know. Brandon grabbed his keys and left, but not before threatening to destroy her if she went to the police. After he left, Mom collapsed on the floor, crying. I showed her the recording. Then I showed her the security footage Uncle Henry had copied. We called the police.
2 detectives came and listened to Brandon's confession on the recording. They watched the bar footage showing his lies about being home that night. One detective said they'd been having doubts about Dad's case anyway, but the pressure to close it had been intense. They put out an arrest warrant that night. Brandon tried to run, but they caught him at a motel 2 towns over. And in his car, they found the actual murder weapon he'd kept as some sick trophy hidden in a lockbox in his trunk. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Brandon finally confessed to everything. Not just my dad's case. Other crimes, other victims in other states, other families he'd destroyed. The detective said Brandon was a serial predator who'd been getting away with it for years. Dad's lawyer filed for an emergency appeal. The judge ordered Dad's immediate release. After 8 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, my dad was coming home. When the prison gates opened and Dad walked out, he looked smaller, thinner, older, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. I ran to him and hugged him tighter than I'd ever hugged anyone. He smelled different, like industrial soap and sadness, but he was still my dad. Brandon's trial was brutal. The evidence was overwhelming. The recording, the security footage, the murder weapon, witness testimony about his lies. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Life without parole, consecutive sentences for each crime. As they let him out, he looked at me one last time. I stared back, wanting him to see that I hadn't broken me, that I'd won. Dad and I started rebuilding our lives. New routines, therapy, slowly healing. Mom tried to apologize, but Dad said that ship had sailed. Some things you can't come back from.
6 months later, Dad started dating Caroline, the bartender who testified. She made him laugh again. A year later, Dad got a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. Brandon died in prison 2 years later. Heart attack at 43. I felt nothing. He'd been dead to me since the verdict. I got into college on a full scholarship, criminal justice, planning to become a lawyer, help other families torn apart by lies and corruption. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's journal, if I'd given up, if I'd let Brandon win. But I didn't give up. I fought for the truth. And sometimes that's all you can do. Fight, even when no one believes you. Fight, even when you're terrified. Because the truth has a way of coming out. You just have to be brave enough to find it. So, yeah, that was absolutely insane. A 13-year-old took down a literal murderer and freed her innocent father from prison. That's the kind of story that restores your faith in justice. What do you think? Could you have pieced it all together like that? Would you have kept fighting? Let me know in the comments. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, do me a favor, smash that like button and subscribe to Redditist for more unbelievable Reddit stories every single day. Drop a justice emoji in the comments if you made it all the way through this roller coaster. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.